All right, so we will get started here with the virtual off-campus housing information session presented to you by the Office of Residential Life and Off-Campus Student Living. Thanks again for your patience as we've had those last few folks roll on in. They'll continue to come in as the session goes on, and we welcome them to being here. I think I skipped a step there. So my name is Andrew Klopstein, pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the Assistant Director for Off-Campus Student Living. I've been at BC for about 5 years now, going into my 6th year. My home is St. Louis, Missouri, and before moving up to Boston, I was a teacher and began my Master's of Higher Education in Administration here at the university. I've also decided that I'll be pursuing a Master's of Business of Administration. I want to also turn it over to Sarah Shabe, who is our Graduate Assistant for Off-Campus Student Living, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Graduate Assistant for Off-Campus Student Living. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Home for me is Long Island, New York, specifically Suffolk County, because that's where I grew up, and that's also where I got my bachelor's degree from Stony Brook University. Currently, I am a first semester graduate student in the Master's of Higher Education with a Student Affairs focus, so I'm super excited to be here with you all today.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So I wanted to just give you some kind of ground rules here. If you have any questions, you're welcome to submit them at any time through the chat function. Sarah will be monitoring the chat and kind of compiling all of the questions that you have submitted to be answered at the end. Obviously, if you have a question, ask it, but know that it may be answered during the presentation. And if that's the case, Sarah will just go ahead and take those questions out for us at the end. The other thing is that we please ask that you keep your mic on mute. If you're welcome to keep your picture on if you'd like, but at minimum, would like to keep it on mute just so that I don't get too distracted in our presentation. That would be really, really helpful for me, and of course, everybody else that is on this Zoom. So wanted to go over some hot topics here, some highlights of what we'll be talking about today. In no particular order, we're going to talk about the apartment search process and the timeline, look at financial aid and how it's impacted by living off campus, the costs of living off campus. We'll also discuss the housing appeal process if you are interested in appealing for additional semester or semesters on campus. We'll also talk about rental agents, the resources that we have on campus, as well as roommates and subletting. Before we did that, however, I wanted to shoot out a quick couple polls to kind of get a sense of who you are and kind of where you're at. So this is our first poll, and it asks about your housing search progress. So where are you currently in your housing search? I haven't started anything yet, but I'm feeling nervous or pressure. That's okay, we'll talk about that. I've decided who I want to live with, but that's about it. I know who my future roommates are going to be, and we started looking at apartment listings. My future roommates and I have started looking at apartment listings and apartments, or we've found an apartment and we've signed a lease. So go ahead and tell me where you're at so that I can get a sense of how we're doing here. Okay. So it's looking like the vast majority of us, 75% or so, haven't done anything yet. And let me tell you that is absolutely okay. That's actually probably where most students are and where you should be. So we've got, again, sharing those poll results, about 76% are kind of, this is the start. So let me take a look at another poll here. It's really a yes or no question. Are you looking to study abroad? Yes or no? That will help inform kind of the timeline in which you're going to go about your search. All right. We have about an even split here. So let me just share those results with everybody. So we've got 40% who are looking to study abroad next year, either the fall or spring semester. 30% no, and about a third of us are also uncertain. Again, that's okay too. These are uncertain times, uneasy times, so I certainly understand that. But hopefully by that point, life will have returned to a bit greater sense of normalcy. Great. All right, well, thank you for sharing those. That is going to be helpful for me in this conversation. Again, welcome to the presentation. I do hope that you are safe and well and enjoying your first couple of weeks of the semester. But let's go ahead and get on into it here. The first thing that we really want to talk about is kind of the financial aid impacts that off-campus housing has. So under a normal year, you're living on campus, you have the cost of attendance, that's tuition, the fees, etc. But it also is inclusive of on-campus housing, room and board. You take that cost of attendance, and then you subtract your expected family contribution, your EFC. That's what your family will contribute based on your what you filled out on your FAFSA. And that's going to leave you with your financial aid eligibility or your financial aid need. Now, your EFC, your family contribution, is going to stay the same regardless of whether you live on or off campus. However, your cost of attendance at Boston College is going to be lower for students living off campus because that on-campus room and board is not factored into that overall cost. It doesn't factor in that you're living off campus. So in choosing to live off campus, if you are choosing and have 4 years of on-campus housing, or in living off campus, your cost of attendance, or excuse me, your financial aid eligibility is going to be impacted. So I would recommend that that you reach out to your financial aid counselor in student services to determine how your financial aid is going to be impacted so that you can make a sound financial decision on the type and expense of apartment that you should be looking to enter into next year. And speaking about costs, there are really 4 major upfront costs that you might expect to pay in going into the off-campus community. So when you rent an apartment, of course, you're going to be asked to pay the first month's rent. That's pretty self-explanatory. You need to be living in your apartment for the first month. So you're upfront going to be asked to pay that. You may also be asked to pay upfront your last month's rent. So when you sign the lease, you'd be paying both first and last month's rent. The reason that landlords ask for the last month's rent upfront is really to protect themselves financially. They don't want somebody who's been living in an apartment for the past 11 months to then just ditch at the start of the 12th month because they've already located a new apartment. So it's really a way to ensure that they get the money that they've been promised in the lease agreement. You would also be expected to pay a security deposit upfront prior to the start of your lease. That security deposit can be up to 1 month's rent. So let's say, for example, that your monthly rent is $1,000 per month. So you'd be paying a first month's rent of $1,000, last month's rent of $1,000, and your security deposit is $1,000. Doesn't have to be, but it can be up to 1 month's rent. Can't be more. You also would be potentially asked to pay a lock-in key change fee. That's going to be pretty minimal. And then if you use a rental agent, such as a broker or something like that, you're going to be asked to pay an upfront fee for their services as well. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the fee is paid by the tenant as opposed to the landlord. So I know that in other states that's very different, but in Massachusetts, in our case, you're going to be paying that agent fee, and it can also be up to 1 month's full rent. So continuing with our example, you have $3,000 that you'd be paying up front, plus an additional $1,000 if you used a rental agent. So a total of $4,000 up front before even stepping into the apartment. So you need to know kind of those upfront costs. Again, the agent fee is negotiable, just like the security deposit. traditionally, again, the security deposit is 1 full month's rent, but the agent fee can be negotiated if you'd like. Otherwise, can be 1 month's rent, can't be more. You should know that application fees are illegal. These are fees that are charged to you prior to signing any lease agreement. It's essentially a fee to get the process started if you're using a rental agent or your landlord tries to ask for that. None of that is legal. So if you hear of that, please let us know. We're happy to help, and we want to flag whomever is doing that. Continuing with our cost comparison here, this is data that was compiled in the past year and a half, beginning in January, from Zillow, as well as our off-campus housing database and other databases in our area that really takes a look at what are the costs for rents in our area. So you're going to find this document on our off-campus housing database, which I'll give you the link here at the end of the presentation. But there's 2 sections. The first is kind of a general unit cost, but this section that you're seeing here is what you personally can expect to pay if the unit is evenly distributed, or the cost is evenly distributed among all the tenants. So I've circled that $950 mark because that is what you're currently living in. You're living in a shared room with a direct roommate in an apartment or a suite or a traditional double. That's where you are right now. And so that is both a target for you to try and shoot for based on what your current circumstances, but it's also going to be factored into your financial aid. So again, it's going to be really important for you to see how your financial aid circumstances change in living off campus by talking with your financial aid counselor. But you can kind of see here how the price breakdown goes. So the medium cost, the medium range for living alone in a bedroom all your own is about $1,800. So it's not generally feasible for students to do that, but living with, so living with others is going to be really important. That's going to drive your cost down to about $1,200. And then again, a direct comparison of what you're doing now, living with others in a shared room, is about $950 per month. So I would really recommend that you check out this rental cost comparison on our off-campus housing database. So when we did a survey of students, about 65% of students in 2017 reported paying between $700 and $1,000 per month on their rent. That is not inclusive of utilities, so that's going to be a little bit more. But this breakdown will help you kind of get a sense of real-time data, real-life data from your peers in 2017 about what they paid, so what you can expect to potentially pay. So your range, you can see here in the middle of that chart there, is 31% pay between $800 and $900 per month in rent, with the additional 23% paying between $900 and $1,000, 21% paying between $1,000 and $1,500. Well, 5% really pay more than $1,500. That's a significant minority. It is difficult to say right now what the impacts of COVID-19 have had on the cost of rentals for the September 2021 start date. That is a long way out, and it is hard to know exactly how long the pandemic will continue going on and how that might impact the rental process and the rental unit costs come that September 2021. So it's hard for me to hypothesize. What I can say is that rental units are more readily available at this point in time than what they traditionally are. That's for a number of reasons, but primarily related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We haven't seen the influx of students that we typically see among all of the institutions of higher education in the city of Boston. We also haven't seen kind of the traditional influx, seasonal influx of new residents in the city of Boston come September 1. So there is a lot of available apartments at this point in time, and they have been discounted. To what degree, though, it really is dependent on the individual landlord, dependent on the individual property management company. So it's going to probably be a case-by-case basis there for you. But good information to have so you can kind of ballpark where you should target your rental cost search. So I mentioned security deposits a little bit earlier in some of our upfront costs, but the landlord, you should know that the landlord should place that 1 full month's rent worth of your security deposit in a separate interest-bearing account in a bank located in Massachusetts. And so within 30 days of you giving them the security deposit via check, which is recommended, don't ever wire money. It's a big red flag. Don't ever wire money, but give it to them in a check form. Within 30 days of them receiving that security deposit, the landlord needs to give you a receipt containing the following information: the name and location of the bank where the money is held, the account number, and the amount of the deposit. The reason being is that this money accrues interest, and by being at a bank, you know that it is safeguarded, accruing that interest, and will be returned to you with interest in full should there be no damage in the apartment upon moving out within 30 days of your moving out at the end of your lease term. Again, security deposits can be 1 month's rent, traditionally are, they generally are not less than that, but legally they cannot be more than that. So if you haven't received your security deposit receipt from your landlord within 30 days, you need to be sure to ask for it. A little bit of information about rental agents here. Just know that they get paid when you sign a lease. And so they're probably going to try and pressure you to sign that lease because that's how they make their commission, by saying you need to sign by tonight or it will be gone tomorrow. Please know that this is a huge red flag. If I was in this situation, I would say, that's fine. There are other units available. I do not need to be signing on to something that I'm not yet totally comfortable with. If they say that to you, feel free to push back. Feel free to come talk with us about the discomfort that causes. Know that you can shop around for your rental agent. Really recommend that you find one that you trust, that you feel like you've got a good personal connection with, that has your best interests at heart. And lastly, if you do use a rental agent, you may be asked to sign a broker disclosure form. This is normal. Essentially what this means is that the broker, it's an acknowledgement that the broker or the rental agent is both working for the landlord in trying to find tenants for them, and at the same time working to find a place for you as somebody who's using their services to live. So trying to help you become a tenant in a vacant apartment. So it's just that's just an acknowledgement that is the relationship that they have there, both with you and the landlord. I know that you mentioned, a number of you mentioned that you haven't started searching, and again, that is totally normal. In fact, I'm glad to see that you haven't started searching. One, because a number of factors, but namely, study abroad decisions haven't been distributed and won't be distributed until January. So you need to be informed about your search. And without having that information, you don't know who's going to be living among your potential roommates, who's going to be living in the apartment which semester. It also is totally normal, and the vast majority of students actually sign for an apartment in the spring semester of their sophomore year. So please disregard the narrative that some students hear that all of the off-campus houses are gone by the end of September of their sophomore year. That is absolutely not accurate. So please, please know that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But what you see on the screen here is the ideal process for finding an apartment. So ideally, your rental agent or you and your future roommates are going to see apartment 1, apartment 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then make an informed decision, make a comparison, pro and con list, whatever it might be, to find that right apartment for you. But in reality, what we often see is that student groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sign on to the first apartment that they see. Now that is really not recommended, because you're not getting a great sense of what is out there. So for example, let's say in apartment A, that's the apartment that you and your roommates see. Let's say it's a 3-bedroom apartment with nice, nice amenities. Right next door, it could be apartment B, a 3-bedroom apartment with granite countertops, working fireplace. It's got free Wi-Fi. It's got, a hot tub in the backyard. I don't know, whatever it might be. There's no way for you to know that that apartment exists if you see and sign on the dotted line for apartment A from the get-go. There's really no opportunity for you to make those comparisons. Additionally, apartment B might be $200 a month cheaper than apartment A. So not only is apartment B giving you better amenities for a cheaper price, there's no way for you to know that without searching and doing your homework and going and visiting multiple apartments. So please don't fall victim into this traditional pattern that we see. There is no reason for you to sign on the dotted line for the first apartment that you see. If I'm buying a new house, I'm not going to look at one house and say, that's it. I'm going to look around and get a sense of what's out there. So I mentioned this earlier a moment ago, but about 60% of our students sign off-campus lease this semester, the spring of their sophomore year, or the summer before their lease started. If you are a transfer student, the same applies for you. So you're going to typically sign in the spring of this year, since you'll be living off campus next year, and the spring of every other year beyond that. So please know that there is, again, no rush for you to sign onto an apartment right now. The vast majority, 14%, the vast minority, 14%, sign a lease in September. So a very small amount of people will actually do that. And they're not well served in that process for the reasons we just mentioned. You should sign your lease when you and your group are ready. It'll be different for every situation. Know that there's plenty of off-campus housing in the area available at any time of the year. I get multiple calls a day at this present moment of landlords saying that they have rentals available. That's true in any year, and throughout the year. There is off-campus housing available. Now, it may not be the exact house that you're looking for in the exact area that you're looking for it to be, and it may not have all of the amenities that you're looking for. Nonetheless, it will be a roof over your head that that likely is going to meet the majority of your needs. Some things that you should keep in mind. The junior year is really different. And any year that you live off campus, if you're a transfer student, is going to be different than living on campus. There are more people in the area, there are more variables, and that typically leads to more potential problems. For example, if you host a 100-person party, the consequences of doing so on campus are going to be different than the consequences of doing so off campus. Off campus, you're not only going to face student conduct as a result of hosting that social gathering, but it is likely that the police will be called to your house and that you will be taken into to court for any number of violations. So not only do you have student conduct to to face, but you also have the judicial system to face in the city of Boston. So those variables, that additional freedom that you might experience by living off campus, comes with additional responsibility. And you should know that that additional responsibility means that there can be additional consequences for your decisions. One thing that I want you to know is that in the city of Boston, there's an ordinance limiting the occupancy of an off-campus apartment of unrelated individuals to 4 or fewer. Therefore, you're really recommended to conduct your off-campus housing search with 4 or fewer people. So you and 3 others, or you and 2 others, etc. If you are to sign on to a lease of greater than 4 people in an apartment, know that it's likely that, that everyone on that lease will not be, will either, some of them will be either subleasing or only 4 are fully written onto the lease. What I'm trying to say is, and saying ineloquently, is that not everybody will have all legal rights to the space. And so there are consequences of living in an apartment with more than 4 folks. If you do end up living in an apartment with more than 4 people, it's very unlikely that you will be asked to leave in the middle of the year by Boston Inspectional Services. That's less likely. What is more likely is that the landlord will face a fine or a fee for violating the Boston ordinance of signing on more than 4 people onto their lease agreement. Nonetheless, you are strongly recommended to abide by that city ordinance. Again, living with more than 4 people tends to get tricky as it is among roommates and roommate dynamics, so I really recommend that you limit it to 4. Know also that leases are legally binding contracts, meaning that you are jointly and severally liable. That's legalese, meaning that everybody that signs onto the lease is seen as one entity on the lease. So let's say you and your 3 friends sign on to a lease on Foster Street, and one person decides, you know, I actually need to go home. I am not going to be living in this apartment any longer. I will not be able to pay my end of my share of the lease, the monthly rent. While that is kind of a crappy thing to do, it nonetheless means that the remaining 3 of you need to come up with that individual's share of the rent. The landlord and the lease does not care who is or isn't in the apartment, so long as the monthly rent is paid on time and in full. So while that person might, you know, might be leaving you all high and dry, it's ultimately your responsibility to ensure that the rent is paid. Just to talk briefly about the apartment search process, you started it by learning about that process today, kind of the general housing information search. You need to discuss your finances and with your roommates and your co-signers, who typically are your parents and guardians. When you begin your search and find a potential apartment, contact the landlord, the property manager, or the agent to view the listing, tour the apartment, check it out. One thing that we typically see students kind of falling victim to is they sign on the dotted line without really even looking at the apartment. A lot of them will sign without even stepping foot into the apartment. Again, I wouldn't buy a house that I've never seen the inside of before. You shouldn't sign on to an apartment that you've never seen the inside of. Please, please, please don't let that be you. Check out the facilities, note any problems that are in there, and follow up with the property manager and the landlord at the time of viewing, saying this, that, or something else needs to be addressed before I'm comfortable signing on to the lease. If you want a specific apartment and you found the one that you want, you may be asked to put down a holding deposit. Typically, this is kind of seen as the 1 month's rent, the first month's rent that will just be held from the time that you express interest to the time you sign the lease, and then roll over to turn into that first month's rent. Of course, you're going to review the lease and the addendum, making any needed changes. You need to read through the lease in its entirety. It's also typically good practice to have your co-signers read through that agreement as well, because they are legally obligated to pay the rent in the event that you do not. Have all the tenants sign the lease, preferably at the same time, to ensure that everything goes right and well. And get a copy of that signed lease within 30 days of of signing it. So you should have an electronic copy with your signatures and the landlord's signature in hand within 30 days of signing the lease. If the landlord does not sign the lease, it is not a fully executed lease, which means you have no legal right to the apartment. So make sure to get a copy of that lease with your name, your signatures, and your landlord's signature. And of course, make your required payments on time. A little bit about subleasing here, or subletting rather. You need to check with your landlord and the lease to ensure that subletting is allowed. Say you are going to study abroad and in the spring, and you need to find somebody to sublease your apartment for the spring semester. Well, you can't really do that if the lease expressly says that is not allowed. You could face severe consequences legally as a result. But unless it's otherwise written into the lease or something like that, you're gonna be able to sublet. And we would recommend that you and your sublessee sign a Massachusetts agreement to sublet, which you can find on our off-campus housing database. We recommend that you try and get as much rent upfront as possible. That's a way for you to financially protect yourselves and collect a security deposit to cover possible damages that your sublessee could leave behind in the apartment in that spring semester while you're studying abroad. Know that the landlord has the right to approve any sublessee, and some charge a fee to allow their tenants to sublet. Both of those things are legal. So generally, subletting is not an issue, but we would just recommend that you ensure that you are able to do so, especially if you or your roommates are planning to study abroad. The one thing to know is that that should say fall 2021, I apologize. Fall 2021 classes begin on Monday, August 30th, while leases historically begin on September 1. Therefore, you need to work with your agent, your landlord, or your property manager to discuss an earlier move-in date, make arrangements to get your things in the basement with the current tenants. You could stay with a friend who lives in an off-campus apartment and was able to acquire an early move-in. You and your roommates could rent an Airbnb until that time in which you are able to move into your apartment. But just know that on-campus accommodations are not going to be available. And Sarah and I are happy to talk with you about, again, those options to kind of get you over the hump there from the 30th to the 1st. Briefly, I want to talk about housing appeals, and so we'll jump into that. So the housing appeal form will become available this fall in mid-October. You can find it by going to Agora and clicking on the My Res Life form. Just be sure to select the correct semester or year. So mid-October is the date that you're going to want to keep in mind if you would like to appeal for an additional semester or year of on-campus housing. Know that there are two major reasons to file an appeal, although anybody is able to file an appeal for any reason. You're also able to file multiple appeals as new information about your situation is revealed or documented with the university. But the reasons that we see most appeals be approved for is documented disabilities that require living accommodations that cannot be accommodated off campus and really can only be accommodated by living on campus. That would be, that documentation would be filed with the Office of Disability Services and the Student Outreach and Support Office. The other reason is that there are significant financial hardships that would be imposed upon you by living off campus or that you are currently experiencing uh, uh, as a student and within your family. That documentation needs to be submitted to student services and your financial aid counselor. At the end of the day, know that staff from health services, disability services, and financial aid are going to provide the information that we need to determine whether or not an appeal is available for you. So ultimately, they are going to make the decision on your appeal. As I mentioned, you're allowed to reappeal if you submit new information, and know that decisions are made on a rolling basis. So we will continue to review appeals throughout the fall semester and the spring semester, really starting in October. As we get a new batch of appeals, we will take a look at those. I want to, again, thank you for your time today. Sarah is going to open up the chat function here. So Sarah, did we have any questions that were submitted that weren't answered in the presentation that I can address?
Yes, we just had 4.
Great.
So one student asked, if I don't know how many years of housing I have, where would I check?
Yeah, so it's actually written into your admissions letter. So if you jump on into your admissions letter, the admissions office determines how many years of on-campus housing you have. If you're a transfer student, you only have 1 year of on-campus housing. It's typically taken in your first year. So if you are currently a transfer student and living on campus, this is your year of on-campus housing. Some other students will have 4 years of on-campus housing, but the vast majority of students will have 3 years of on-campus housing, and it is required that the off-campus year be taken in the junior year. So check out your admissions letter. You can also give us a phone call in the Office of Residential Life. The main line is 617-552-3060, and just ask to speak with the placement office, and they'd be happy to look up that information for you.
So another question we received was during their junior year, can they still live on campus their senior year?
So great question. If you have 3 years of on-campus housing, you are able to live off campus your junior year, and then your 4th year, you'll be taking that 3rd year of on-campus housing. So you would be moving back on campus for your senior year. That is very common. Most students will do that.
So we have 2 more questions because I just received another one. One student asked, do we need to sign as a group because they're the only one among their friends that doesn't have 4 years, and was just wondering if they can get housing by themselves?
Absolutely, of course you can. Yeah, you're able to find, so if you have 4 years of housing and you want to live on campus for your junior year, totally possible. What you would want to do is find a group of students to live with who are either juniors with you, or you could live with sophomores, or you could live with seniors, or any combination thereof, who will be living on campus, and go through the housing selection process with them. You could also enter final selection, which is our way of placing students into individual spaces that are open. Of course, we would look at roommate compatibility index to ensure that the place that we would be placing you is going to be a good fit for for all students involved. So yes, that is definitely a possibility. There is no requirement to live off campus if you have 4 years of guaranteed housing.
Another student asked, how many people who submit an appeal actually receive that extra year? So like, how common is it that those appeals get granted?
It really depends on every year, because our numbers are going to fluctuate every year. And of course, those appeals are granted on a case-by-case basis. Unfortunately, because I don't run the appeals process, I don't have great information on that. So if you think that that's might be something that you want to do, I would just recommend that you file your appeal in October, providing yourself plenty of time to receive your appeal decision and still have enough time to work with an off-campus group to find a potential apartment come the spring semester.
Okay. So we're getting a few more questions, so that's good.
Sure, keep them coming.
So do students have to live off campus their junior year, or can they trade it for a different year?
It is non-transferable. If you have only 3 years of housing on campus, you must take your off-campus year the junior year.
And then the last question okay. How can students find people to live with if most of their friends have 4 years of on-campus housing?
To answer your question, whomever asked, that's great. It's a great inquiry. And we make it pretty easy here by if you log into our off-campus housing database, which you can find at offcampushousing.bc.edu. I'll share my screen here. So you should be able to see our off-campus housing database here. This is kind of our one-stop shop for you to find both places to live in clicking the housing tab up here, as well as roommates to live with. So we'll start with roommates because that's the question that was asked. As you can see, there are a number of folks, 217, who are roommates either looking for other people to live with in a place, or roommates who have a place to live and are looking for somebody to come live with them. So that's where you can see have a place and need a place. You'll also notice that these folks come from any number of universities in our area here. So you have every possibility to live with other college students and other neighboring institutions. You can filter out kind of when you're looking to move in, as well as whom you're looking to live with. And what kind of your smoking preferences are, cleanliness, and you can read their biography, of course, as well. It's a way for us to help connect you with other folks at Boston College, but also at neighboring institutions who use the same platform. So that's a quick and easy way to do that. Additionally, you can work with our office to let us know that you're looking for roommates, and we will keep a list running of individuals who haven't found folks to live with yet. And we're happy to kind of connect you as well. But while we're here, I also want to highlight the off-campus housing database's housing search function. You can, like any apartment search database, you can kind of create your filters that you want to list here. You can click more filters and say, I want to live in the Newton area or the Austin area or the Cambridge area, and filter out your amenities like a dishwasher or near a tea stop or something like that. There's a whole slew of filters here that you can create for yourself in addition to your monthly rent cost to find a great apartment fit for you. One thing that I want to highlight here is let's say if we click on this listing, because of COVID-19, we're really emphasizing how virtual tours, as well as creating an opportunity for landlords to post additional photos that we otherwise wouldn't allow, to help you get a sense of a space that you might be interested in renting. So you'll see a virtual tour button if they have a virtual tour here. If they've got a video, you'll see the button here, and you can see, of course, all of these photos and click through those. You'll see here who it's listed by and what company. If it's a property management company or a rental complex, or if it's an individual landlord, they will be listed here. And you can check the availability of the apartment by contacting the landlord there, or the rental complex. You can reach out to them via email on this platform and read through the profile here. You can kind of see the amenities as well as the floor plans on those tabs as well. So it's really great one-stop shop for you. One other thing that I want to highlight is our resources tab. There is a whole slew of resources that I would recommend that you take a look at after reading through our frequently asked questions, which you can find here linked to our website. But if you're interested in subletting your apartment, as we talked about in the presentation today, we've got a guide on how to do that. We've got information about what a guarantor is, how do you find one, who can be one, the parking information, the roommate, the rental cost comparison, which you'll find right here. So you just simply click on that, and it'll take you to the document at hand. So this is the rental cost comparison that I was speaking about. This would be considered the cost of a unit, and this would be the individual person cost based on the type of accommodation and in this case, the city in which it's located. So really, really great resources. I would recommend that you take a look at that. So that is the off-campus housing database. And if you're looking to connect with an agent, there's agent and broker information on this tab as well. So you can simply sign in with your Agora username and password. Very, very simple to do so. Just log on in. Sarah, any other questions there?
Okay. While we're on the topic of appeals and 3 years of housing, I'm going to ask you those questions first, and then we have one other unrelated.
Sure.
Can a student be granted an appeal solely for being an international student?
Again, appeals are granted on a case-by-case basis, so we'd have to read through the appeal, but just by that description alone, I would say no. Probably, I mean, certainly it's possible, but I don't have enough information from that alone to be able to say whether or not that's something that would be approved.
And then one last question having to do with the years of housing. If I have a friend that has 4 years but decides to take a semester to study internationally, can I take their semester of housing?
No. Again, guaranteed housing is non-transferable, but between people, between semesters, that is not something we're able to accommodate.
All right. And then lastly, how is the off-campus community responding to COVID in regards to leases and uncertainty?
Yeah, so if you are concerned about that, I would recommend that you take a look at our website. So again, vc.edu/off-campus, and you find some of the recommendations for searching during the times of COVID-19. It's right there on the front page. There'll be opportunities for you to take a look at what kind of some of the strategies that we're recommending. One of them that comes to mind is we are recommending that students reach out to their landlord or landlord they're potentially interested in signing with and inquire about a worry-free clause in their lease, saying that should the university not open for whatever reason due to COVID-19 or anything that's therein related, that either there be an opportunity to leave the lease or negotiate reduced rent. I would say at this point in time, it is unlikely for landlords to agree to that, simply because you would be signing for an apartment starting in September 2021. I certainly hope that the state of our nation and the world is in a better position by that time with regard to the pandemic. So it is less likely that landlords are going to agree to that. It is also less likely, I would imagine, that the university would be going remote. I would certainly hope that would be the case. I certainly hope that the pandemic has been resolved by then. At any rate, it is nonetheless a good opportunity for you to engage in a conversation with your landlord around whether or not there can be accommodations to the lease agreement should the university go remote at any point in time due to COVID-19. That way you're not starting from scratch when it happens, if it happens, and you can kind of go back to that initial conversation that you've had with them. Again, it's not very likely that is going to be the case, I would imagine, going forward, but good to engage that conversation.
All right, that was all of the questions, Andrew.
Awesome. Well, before you all log off, I would just point to you some of the links here at the bottom of the screen here. The off-campus housing database is what I just showed you. You can find it at offcampushousing.bc.edu. I would encourage you to follow us on Facebook, like that page, as well as Twitter and Instagram. We have some really great stories to highlight on our Instagram profile. You can also check out our blogger that has additional information around life off campus, the housing search process, etc. Our contact information you'll also find there. Because we are working remotely, we recommend that you reach out to schedule a phone call or a Zoom session with us. We'd be happy to, Sarah and I'd be happy to meet with you and kind of talk through the off-campus search process.